And can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Beautiful. Cool. Okay. Okay, so as Kiko mentioned, what I'm going to be sharing with you all today is what is EQ and why it's essential for designers to develop. And I'll be doing that through the lens of sharing a bit about me, giving you all a background of what is EQ or emotional intelligence, why it's essential for designers to develop, as well as providing you some further resources. So a bit about me. So currently I'm the founder and CEO of Design2Be, and Design2Be is a community for designers to grow their emotional intelligence. But before wearing this founder and CEO hat, I've been a designer throughout my entire career. So a bit of a background. So I got my BFA in graphic design from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I'm going to give you all the story that you would not see if you just stalked my LinkedIn. So this is going to be a little bit of a different narrative. So as I mentioned, I got my BFA in graphic design from UIUC. And upon graduating school, as much as I loved graphic design, I realized that creating logos and posters and designing brands was not my strong suit. So my senior year of school, I did a bunch of different networking conversations and stalked a bunch of people on LinkedIn and had a lot of conversations with folks of, I'd love to pick your brain to understand those kinds of questions, to understand with a foundation in graphic design, what else can I do? And so upon reaching out to a bunch of different folks, I realized that there was this thing called UX. And I graduated school in 2014, so not too long ago, but still a while ago. And at that time, UX wasn't as notable of a profession that it is now. So especially in the past 5 years, there's been all these different UX, UI boot camps that have sprouted up. And in the business world, the importance of design has really blossomed, which has been a really cool and beautiful thing. And for all of you that are on this call, it's cool to be in this spot of noting just the vast potential that diving into design, whether it be in high school or in college, can really have that effect. So for me, upon having these different conversations, I was like, whoa, this thing called UX is super cool. It combines psychology, it combines business, but then it also has elements of kind of art, but more from a design problem-solving perspective, which is all things that I really loved. And right out of school, I had an internship at an agency called Digitas. And upon getting there, so I didn't major in UX when I went to school. I majored in graphic design. And so what I really experienced upon getting into the working world was a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and a lot of perfectionism. And as I mentioned, these are things that you're not going to see if you just stalk my LinkedIn. And so I was really struggling with mental health at the time. And as a designer, you walk a fine line of needing to make sure that every single pixel is perfect in your design, but also making sure that you're kind to yourself about it, and not like being super upset if something's like 1 pixel off. So that's really the perfectionist nature, and just holding myself to such a high bar. I really, really struggled with anxiety, and the counterpart of that, kind of the opposite, is depression. So it was really hard for me a lot to get out of bed and really motivate myself. And I remember I had a manager while I was at Digitas, and I was saying that, yeah, it's just been really hard for me to motivate myself to get out of bed. And a lot of days when it's not work, I just lay in bed. And he was like, honey, that's depression. And I was like, oh, yeah. And so early on in my career, I've started to notice how much my mental health was affecting me as a designer. And when you start your design career and you're learning all of these different skills, understanding the hard skills are so important. It's what's going to help you create a portfolio. But what we're going to be talking about today is more of the soft skills, the EQ side of things, the emotional intelligence, that can really shift things. So a way for me that I started to navigate this like crippling anxiety, depression, and perfectionism was I started to use Headspace. So for folks that are not familiar with Headspace, it's a meditation app. And in the past, since I started using it in 2014, Headspace has totally expanded. They now are on Netflix, and they're one of the most well-known meditation apps. When I started using it, it was this brand new app that no one really knew about. But I was listening to different podcasts and people kept talking about the benefits of meditation. So I was curious. So I started meditating. And I've always been someone to lean into different things that I've been passionate about. So on the side, while I was working at Digitas, I helped co-found a startup. And it was a very much learnings of everything that I didn't want to do. And as you navigate your career, whether it be as a designer or anything in STEAM, understanding what not to do is just as important as understanding what you do want to do. So especially early on in your career. So a lot of the things early on in my career was like, oh, nope, not this. Whoa, nope, not this. Okay, maybe a little more of this. So for me, just from structuring this business, it was learning a lot what I did not want to do moving forward. So I always had a dream of one day moving to San Francisco and living in California. But really, San Francisco, since it's the center of big tech, so you have all of the different FANG companies, so like Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, or Amazon. And so I'm from Chicago, then moved out to Salesforce, moved out to San Francisco to work at Salesforce as a product designer. And even though I was already doing UX right out of college, taking on a role as a product designer was very different. It was a different set of skills. If any of you know what Salesforce is, it's customer relationship management software. It's basically software that helps businesses run their business. And it was very complex, but the nerd in me loved it. But also in this same vein, I was still struggling with the things that I mentioned at the beginning. So still the anxiety, the depression, the perfectionism. But I was using Headspace a lot and started to see the benefits that meditation provided. So I started to slowly develop a little more awareness and a little more space in my mind of, okay, yes, I am experiencing this. I am experiencing these emotions of overwhelm, or I am experiencing this vast sadness. And instead of these emotions completely taking over me, I had a little more awareness and being able to see them as they are. And really noticed that because of meditation, I was able to do so. So I then enrolled in a transcendental meditation course. So if anyone's heard of, it's called TM. The Beatles made it really famous a long time ago. But I enrolled in a TM course now, like 5.5 years ago. And I haven't missed a day of meditation since. So it's, long story short, it's been working. But I'm not going to give all the benefit to meditation. So even though I didn't miss a single day of meditation, and I don't plan on ever missing a day of meditation, like how I brush my teeth every day. It's kind of icky. You don't just leave the house without brushing your teeth. I also need to brush my mind every day. I also started going to therapy, and then enrolled in a 200-hour yoga teacher training. And during this time, Google reached out about a year earlier, and I joined Google as an interaction designer. And working at the large tech organizations, while it can be very like empowering and incredible, it's also really intimidating and really scary. Like being at Google, you're with some of the smartest people in the entire world. And in that vein, it can be very intimidating. So I also was looking at other ways to invest in myself, since I really noticed that my mental health struggles were really impacting how I showed up as a designer. So I started working with a coach, and then really saw the benefits of meditation that I mentioned to you all. So I enrolled in a meditation teacher training. And upon reflecting on a big part of my own personal practice, personally, but also as a designer, is reflecting on where my career is, and also where I want to go. So I enrolled in an emotional intelligence certification course, since I noticed a lot of these things, anxiety, depression, perfectionism, getting into meditation and all of that. As I mentioned, those are these soft skills, which bubble up into this idea of emotional intelligence. And then since have started to coach different people, a lot of them being designers, on emotional intelligence. So outside of being the founder and CEO of Design to Be, I'm also an emotional intelligence coach. And this brings me back to present day. But the goal of our time together today is not just to give you all a spiel of what my career has been up to this point. One thing that I did note on, and a couple questions that I did consistently ask throughout my career that did make me a more impactful designer, are these two questions. So where am I, and where do I want to go? And asking these questions consistently of, okay, where am I in my career? What are the things that I've learned up to this point? Really helps to give awareness into your skill set, but also understanding out of the people that you're interacting with, what are you learning? What are you learning from other people? But also from this current experience that you're in, where do you see yourself in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, or even 10 years? So one thing that is very apparent to designers, or really any profession, is understanding that it's important to, but specifically designers, how important it is to fine-tune your craft in order to lead or create real impact. So my aim of this conversation today is not to discount any of the hard skills. To be an effective designer and an impactful designer, it's so important to get an education in design, whether that means you're self-taught, you get a BFA and an MFA, a master's in human computer interaction, you do any boot camps. There's some incredible boot camps out there now. But that's very much the foundation. And what most of us don't focus on is our relationship to the craft itself. So for me, when I was designing, I noticed that a lot of times I would feel I would experience a lot of creative blocks, or I'd feel really burnt out after having a long design sprint, and I'd be like, whoa, what just happened? Or I'd feel really overwhelmed going into a big review with a bunch of really high up people at Google. Or there'd be different conflict with team members or stakeholders who'd have very strong and conflicting opinions. No one teaches you those skills. No one. But when looking at so at Google and at a lot of other companies, you have a performance review. So it's understanding, okay, based on the role that you're in, what are the skills that you need in order to excel at your job? And those are many, many hard skills, but there are also many, many soft skills, which is emotional intelligence. So Designed to Be, what I created, is aiming to change that. So Designed to Be is a community for designers to grow their emotional intelligence. And there's a bunch of ways that we aim to support designers, a couple which that I'll share at the end. But before we get any further, I want to share a bit about what EQ is. So I'm curious if folks can write in, oh, I'm just seeing some questions. Okay, so how do you quiet your mind in, yeah, I'll take a pause and answer some questions. So how do you quiet your mind in meditation? So it totally depends on the kind of meditation that you're doing. So in transcendental meditation, you repeat a mantra, which is basically a sound, and over. If you've ever snorkeled or gone scuba diving, it's similar to, at the beginning you're snorkeling and you're repeating this mantra over and over, this sound over and over, and then slowly you go down, and the waves are kind of like the waves are kind of like thoughts, but slowly you settle down. And I would encourage you to reframe the question, where a big misconception with meditation is you need to like do something, you need to try to make your mind quiet. And it's more counterintuitive, where like the less you do and the more that you can think of your natural state is silence, is this state of quiet, and just letting your mind run and viewing it as like you're kind of like the sky and your mind is like clouds. Some days there might be a thunderstorm, some days there might be a beautiful blue sky, but just like allowing things to pass as they do. Zunaria, so I'm going to major in computer engineering, but I've really wanted to self-learn graphic design. How do you suggest I start that? So I feel like there's a bunch of really good boot camps, but I feel like YouTube is such an incredible gift. So I bet there's a bunch of influencers that you could look up, like how to learn graphic design. But there's also a bunch of books out there I would like search on Google, like best intro to graphic design books. A big part of graphic design is typography. So if you search like best type books, or it really depends on what you'd want to do with graphic design, where you'd want to understand. But yeah, thank you all for the question. I'll keep the chat a little more present as well. So I'm curious from your all's perspective, by writing in the chat, can anyone share what they think EQ is, or what EQ is not? So EQ being emotional intelligence. Knowing how to read a situation. Okay. Judy, what do you mean by that? Or a person? When you say how to read, what does that mean? To do with mental thought?
Sort of like when you're in a gathering of people, and there's a person who is just talking and just long, overwinded, and everyone else is sort of like looking around, looking at their shoes, looking, like wanting it to be over, but nobody's saying anything.
Yeah, totally.
And then, yeah. And then like, hopefully somebody says, anyway, like hopefully changes the subject or something.
Yeah.
Sort of like that.
Amazing, amazing. So you touched on one element of emotional intelligence, which is social awareness, which is a very, very important part of emotional intelligence. But yeah, definitely. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So say you just looked up emotional intelligence on Google or made your way to the Oxford Dictionary. You'd find this definition for emotional intelligence. So the Oxford Dictionary defines emotional intelligence as the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and how to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. But where did this come from, and like what does it really mean? I feel like out of the box definitions aren't always the most helpful. So these two guys back in 1990, Peter Salovey and John D. Mayer, coined the term emotional intelligence. So 1990, my hunch is many of you were not born in 1990 and you were maybe born in the 2000s, or maybe we have a couple 1999 people or 1998 people, or maybe mid 90s, I don't know. But emotion, that's not that old in terms of how terms go. And so the way that they described it, it's a form of social intelligence that involves the ability to monitor one's own emotions and others' feelings of emotions, to discriminate amongst them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking. And since the concept's inception in 1990, there's been so many emotional intelligence models and measures. And some of them listing here. So you see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 different ways that people were describing what emotional intelligence is. And what I find really fascinating about this is with things that are completely new, so many people look at ways to understand what it is through their own lens. But one person who really did help put emotional intelligence on the map is this guy, Daniel Goleman. And he came out with this book called Emotional Intelligence. And this book became really well known. And it's why, and many people refer to his model when creating many different courses, or if you look in Fast Company or Forbes or any other publications that maybe write about emotional intelligence, many of them refer to Goleman's model. So as Judy, as I mentioned earlier, the social awareness piece. So when looking at Goleman's model, you have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And so both the left, or the one half, so the self-awareness and self-management, is understanding yourself and how to manage your own emotions. And as Judy mentioned, the social awareness and relationship management is understanding how to read the situation or read another person, and also how to build trusting relationships. But as we saw, there's so many different emotional intelligence models and measures. It's becoming much more difficult to understand which approach best suits your needs. And specifically in what we're talking about today, how can emotional intelligence be used to understand how to become a more impactful, effective designer? So when looking at what we've created with Design to Be, So Design to Be lives at an intersection of relevant design competencies. So taking what you need to be the best possible designer you can be at Google, at Salesforce, or I have many other friends at Twitter, at Facebook, Instagram, which is part of Facebook, and all of these different soft skills or emotional intelligence skills. The EQ models and measures, so going through that whole list that we just went through. And then back to the meditation, so relevant meditation techniques. So Design to Be supports designers to grow their emotional intelligence in this intersection. And the way that we look at emotional intelligence to help designers become more effective in their role is through these different competencies. So first we have meditation and curiosity. And so the most important thing that we have here with meditation is understanding that slowing down can actually allow designers to speed up. So meaning taking that extra moment to take a break or take a deep breath can actually help inspire you or think of that design solution even much more so. So for me, for example, when I was at Salesforce, when I just started that transcendental meditation, I scheduled a time on my calendar called meditate. And a lot of times I would do it right before I would meet with my manager, or I'd have like a big like design review or something like that. And a lot of times I thought of the best ideas when I was deep in meditation. So much so that a lot of times I would like keep my phone and I'd keep it in between my legs and I would just, oh my God, I came up with this amazing idea. And I would write it down. Sometimes it's good just to allow yourself to meditate. But in the same vein, it's also beautiful to have this creative outlet as a result of meditation, which is super cool. We also have curiosity, which is a way to, instead of judging a situation, being able to view your design process and also be more inspired with the world around you. So huge important aspect of being an effective designer, an impactful designer, is constantly being inspired. So understanding how to create unique but effective designs. And a lot of that starts with how can I be curious about the world around me? Next, we have self-awareness. So self-awareness is understanding your own emotions and how they affect yourself, as well as others throughout your design process. So this can be done through practicing both internal and external tools to really understand like a 360-degree view of who you really are as a designer. So as you then go into job interviews or looking to be promoted, understanding, okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What really makes me unique? So only upon understanding who you are is then understanding, okay, what can I do with it? And that's where motivation comes in. So there's a difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic is things outside of you, and intrinsic is inside of you. So while it's amazing to get that bonus or get that promotion, the end of the day, that will only motivate you so far. And understanding what really is your internal vision and what is your own personal goals and energy will really lead you to unshakable will to grow and craft your craft a design career. Next, we have authenticity. So as an authentic designer, it's not only being clear about your career values, it's understanding how to openly and effectively express yourself. So it's being very integral to who you are, but also understanding how to navigate imposter syndrome, which oftentimes is associated with perfectionism. And by being more authentic, it gives people permission to also show up in an authentic way. On the latter half, we next have communication. So as a communicative designer, you're inclusively aware of the room. So it's understanding how to elevate your voice and others through, whether it be your advising or inspiring others or persuading. And it's understanding how to combine public speaking techniques with storytelling, which is a very, depending on where you work, but at any big tech company, storytelling in terms of being a designer is such an essential skill, but one that's also rarely taught. So really to ensure that your message is accurately delivered. Next, we have resilience. So a resilient designer can navigate a situation with more trust and ease. So a big part of being a designer is being in design critique. So receiving a bunch of feedback from people. Some are designers, some are not. And when I was early on in my career, when I was at Digitas, the agency, when people would just be giving me all this feedback to my work, it was so heavy for me. And I was so overwhelmed, and it was so much where people are just picking apart all these things that I did. And I was like, but I worked so hard. What happened? Building your resilience can give you the emotional agility to understand how to navigate those situations. So you don't take it as personally, because it's damn exhausting to always take everything that you get, what feedback that you get personally. But ultimately, by investing in your resilience, you can be completely invincible, which is our goal. So next we have collaborative. So as a designer, you're never designing alone. And I feel like a lot of, one thing that I feel like was challenging for me going from school, I had most of the projects that I did was completely alone, which then in the working world, it's completely different. So a big part of being a collaborative designer is being socially aware of your coworkers, your stakeholders. So stakeholders meaning people who you don't directly work with, but they are like approvers or have a say in what you're creating. And you understand the people that you work with, their strengths, and ultimately how you can work together as a team in a very, very optimal way. And as a result, this can lead to more trusting relationships, which ultimately relate to better designs. And last, we have impact and fulfillment. So as we already mentioned, we know that it's essential to fine-tune our craft in order to lead or really create impact. But now, from investing in all these other skills that we've talked through, having more intentionality and having more authenticity for how you can express yourself leads to greater fulfillment, but also it's understanding what's the kind of impact that you want to leave in the world. So one thing that I noticed from working at Google, while I was working on a product that that impacted over 2 billion people a month. So a lot of people, my mind can't even compute that. I realized that instead of going a mile wide and an inch deep, my impact, at least right now, I'd rather go a mile deep and an inch wide. So meaning that instead of impacting 2 billion people a month, but it kind of impacting their lives, I'd rather impact and help maybe 100 people a month or 1,000 people a month, but have them be like, whoa, oh my God, now my life is completely changed. So by doing this kind of inner work, it's understanding what's the kind of impact that you want to leave in the world. So we've spoken a lot about EQ and a lot about the skills that designers need in order to grow their emotional intelligence. But what we didn't really answer is like, why? So let's first start with the science of emotions. So neuroscience has shown that whenever an event around us occurs, such as the way someone's talking in a meeting, so like right now, the first part of our brain that lights up is our emotional brain, which is pretty cool. A lot of people think that it's more of the logical side of things that sparks up first, but it's actually our emotional brain. And this involves the amygdala tagging events as either a reward or threat, so a friend or foe. So the job of the emotional brain is to make a very, very quick, unconscious determination about whether something or someone is safe or not. So this involves, so that's the first step. So this tag, which is in fact an emotion, is communicating to the thinking brain, which involves structures such as the prefrontal cortex. And it helps us anticipate behavior and make decisions. And ultimately, it ensures our behavior and decisions are the best match to the event. So I'm a visual person, and I'm sure that many of you, since you joined this talk, you're visual people. So what those words actually mean and what they actually look like is something like this. So you have something that happens, and it could easily just be, we're here right now, and these words are coming out of my mouth, which is an event. From there, we have the emotional brain. So in this part of your brain, that's the first place that this event interacts with. From there, it decides, okay, is this useful or is this not useful? So are you satisfied? Is it meaningful? Is it valued? Is it useful? Or does it cause concern, worry, frustration, stress? From there, the thinking brain takes charge and makes a decision or takes action. So upon diving more into the science of emotions, I had an epiphany of, so as designers, most of us spend a majority of our time thinking through tools and techniques and methodologies to become more effective in our roles. Yet we've really lost sight of the full flow of how we make design decisions. And as someone who works in UX, the main job of someone as a UX designer is looking through the whole user experience. So as a customer or a user, what are all the different touch points? So me looking at my own user experience of how I am as a designer, I realize that each design decision that we make is affected by our emotions, but no one ever discusses, oh my God, I didn't even realize that. I'm just reading all these different books about Figma, which it's not bashing that you should be a prototyping whiz, but it's also just understanding that maybe you should understand and bring awareness to what are the emotions that are affecting the designs that you're making. So the more that we can understand how our emotions affect our decision making and our design decision making, the better we can compassionately collaborate and authentically and inclusively communicate, confidently navigate complexity, and act with accountable resilience. And all of these are very, very essential to be an effective designer, whether it be a UX, UI designer or a graphic designer, or maybe even an interior designer, but we'll stick with UX, UI today. So maybe you might be wondering, okay, Rachel, you've spoken a lot, but like, now what? Like, what can I do? Like, I'm ready to get started. So what's one way that you can immediately start elevating your emotional intelligence as a designer? One is through meditation. And if you're new to meditation, and maybe you don't feel comfortable like downloading an app or anything like that, one thing that you can also do that is super simple, that's related but more in the realm of mindfulness, and that I've recommended to many people and many like heads of designs at different places, is every morning upon opening your laptop is take 3 deep, like mindful breaths. So when I say mindful, a lot of people are triggered by the word mindfulness because it's been in the press a lot. But all mindfulness means is just simply being aware. So instead of focusing right on what you need to do next, noticing the expansive nature of your chest, noticing your body and space, just being aware, is your breath really long? Is it really deep? Or is it really short? How do you feel sitting on the chair? Really using your different senses as a way to connect with the present moment. Since the more that we can be in the present moment, the more capacity that we'll be at to be more creative, more impactful, more authentic, more intentional. So I want to go back to where we started at the beginning of these 2 questions that I asked myself, and that I continue to ask myself. So where am I and where do I want to go? And as each of you start to navigate your career wherever you are in your career journey, asking these questions, where am I and where do I want to go? The where am I brings awareness as to, okay, where am I right now in my career? What are the skills that I'm currently looking to grow, or what are my strengths right now? Where do I want to go? Where do I see myself next month? Where do I see myself in 6 months? Where do I see myself in a year? And having this like mind's eye, this view, it's not being attached to, okay, I need to get there. But it gives a nice aim as to, okay, where would I likely like to be? So I'm going to leave you all with some further resources about Design to Be, and then we can leave the last minutes for some questions. So some further resources. So a few ways that Design to Be supports designers. So one of them is through our podcast, Design to Be Conversation. So you can learn more about the podcast at designtobeconversation.com. And Design to Be Conversation is a podcast series where I have conversations with design leaders about how investing in their EQ, or their emotional intelligence, has impacted their design career. And each month we have live community recordings. So these are a way that brings the community together, and are also completely free meetups for folks to listen to a live podcast recording, as well as ask people questions. And in this case, tomorrow evening, Pacific time, we have Felix Lee, and we're talking about scaling impact and growth in community through the lens of emotional intelligence. So if you head to designtobeconversation.com, definitely feel free to reserve your spot. And the next thing we have is the Design to Be training. So if you go to designtobe.com/training, and so we're having exciting news with our 8-week remote design EQ training program that's coming back later. We'll be announcing exciting things this week. So you can join the waitlist and be the first to know at this link. But the Design to Be training brings together designers who seek to be more effective in their role and ultimately craft a career that is filled with meaning and purpose. Will the podcast recordings be on your website? Yeah, so you can go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or we link to each of the episodes at design2beconversation.com. Yeah, thank you for the question, Annie. And so with the Design to Be training, yeah, you're welcome. So we fuse together authentic community, inspirational speakers, actionable techniques to really up-level your design career. And it's open for anyone at different skill sets. So we did have a handful of folks who were just finishing up their masters in human-computer interaction last time around. But if anyone's interested in the Design to Be training or knows another designer who would be interested, definitely join the waitlist here. If you're curious to learn more about Design to Be or about me, here's the link to Design to Be on social. So Instagram, Twitter, we're also on LinkedIn, as well as my link as well. And then you can learn more at Design to Be at design2be.com, or learn more about me at racheldweissman.com. Thank you all. Appreciate your questions. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to leave the last 7-8 minutes for questions.
I had a question about meditation, and I think that, like, especially for students and when you have like a lot of stress from different assignments and schoolwork, it's important, but a lot of students think that they're too busy to start meditating, or they become restless when they're meditating. So do you have any advice for how to get started or encourage people to
meditate? Yeah, so the metaphor that I gave a bit earlier, where it's hard to integrate something new, period. Whether that be you just met a new friend and you want to hang out with them, or you just joined a new class, or you just joined a new club, or whatever it may be. No matter what, it's hard to integrate something new. It's also even harder to integrate something that you don't see immediate results. So for example, I made the comparison to every morning. I assume basically everyone on this call, every morning you brush your teeth. And you do that because you don't want bad breaths. You don't want people to judge you. And number two, more longer term, you don't want to get cavities. So in that same vein, working out your mind is the same thing as having hygiene or working out your body. To actually tactically answer your question, it completely depends. So I'd recommend starting off with an app, whether it be Headspace or Insight Timer or 10% Happier or Calm. There's a bunch of different apps out there.